Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm planning to check in on one of my systems. It's the system that has my red worm mix in it. And I refer to it as the red worm mix because I think that's just what it's commonly known as. It's got some other names, but that's kind of what I'm referring to it as. And it's my population of worms living inside the VermiBag Tote, which is the bag system suspended within that wooden frame over there. So, besides being suggested as a bag that could be run as sort of a liner inside of a tote or a bin, it is also suggested that you could run it as, just a suspended bag within a frame, sort of like the way they normally suggest that one of these flow-through systems gets set up in a frame. Lets it suspend out in the air and get a good amount of airflow. When this system started out 249 days ago, it was originally set up that way and it ran inside of a tub. And it was just maybe a little bit over a month ago, I believe, that we decided we wanted to get it out of there so that it would help the system dry a little bit. So for the past 31 days now, we've been doing what we refer to as foraging in the system, which means 31 days ago was when it received the last of its feedings. And over its lifetime, as you can see here, it's at 22 feedings over the first 218 days, and then the last 31 days is what I refer to as foraging. We left the first 21 days foraging 3 weeks without even looking in on it. Seemed like a bit too much time, so now it's only been 10 days since the last check-in. And I do believe we're probably getting close to the point where we can think about how we're going to get the worms out of the material that they're inhabiting. And that's the reason I put down a couple of my options here. I'm not really married to any one of these ideas. I have the option to light separate these worms because some worms, African night crawlers for example, don't really react that much to bright light. So light separating those types of worms isn't always the most optimal approach. But with these types of worms, I believe that they all do react pretty good to just bright lights overhead, forcing them to dive, enabling you to scrape off the castings that they were occupying. It's a pretty quick way to do it. Another option is to migrate, but that's the opposite. It's not quick at all. It's usually quite time consuming. Systems of mine that you see with perhaps just one edge of the system looking different than the rest, as you see here too. Those are systems where I'm attempting to migrate worms out of the system. And I guess the other option is other, because there's always probably many other ways to go about getting the worms out of their castings. The other option was what I did with my European night crawlers most recently, was I just screened the whole contents of the one bin that these guys were inhabiting. I got so many worms mixed in with all the large stuff that I screened out that I had enough to launch 2 pretty good sized population systems here, and then I even held on to their castings to run as a sort of a cocoon nursery. So I've got that option too. So that's in that other category, I suppose, which is to just almost simulate having one of those trommels or a shaking table to separate worms from castings. So I don't know, I'm kind of up in the air, but we're going to do a quick check-in on the bag, see how it's coming along. And I don't know, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the options, or maybe we'll just decide once we're in there based on something we see. I don't know what to expect. So let's get it up on the bench and see how we're doing. And I guess the other 2 options that were listed on that little board that I didn't really talk about were what to do with the castings after you've done the separation of the worms from their castings. Some people are desperate for the castings and they want them... What the heck? This is weird. I've got a whole bunch of dead worms? Or is it something else? It doesn't... maybe it is worms. What on earth is going on in this bin? Oh my goodness. I still see lots of springtails. Oh my goodness, this is so weird. Last time we were in here, everything seemed fine. There was lots of worms buzzing around all over the place. It almost seems like someone came in here and dropped a freaking nuclear bomb or something. What the hell? I'm sorry, I usually don't use that kind of language here on my family-friendly channel, but every now and then you get a little bit of a surprise. And I guess the surprise I really was not expecting today was a whole bunch of dead worms in this system here. I don't understand what happened. The last time we came in here, we didn't even do anything other than just till the system up and spin it around a little bit. Well, apologies for the graphic content here, but it does look to me like we've sort of gone from what might have been an okay situation, which is what I thought we had previously, but maybe I just missed some sort of really screaming, blaring signs that I should have tuned in on. And I mean, there's still worms in this stuff. Boy, do I feel for these little guys. They're probably not doing very well, since so many of the worms just ended up on the surface and are dead now for whatever reason. Oh my gosh, I really do want to hear some feedback on this, because I'm assuming others have seen something like this. They all seem to have this white powder on them, like a mold has started to grow on them or something. And I guess the other thing is, what's a little bit surprising is that I'm surprised that there isn't just a huge amount of stench with all these worm carcasses in here. Oh, these poor worms. You know, I thought this was going to be one of those 5-minute check-in videos, see how things are doing, flip a coin on what to do next, and then maybe defer until the next visit on whatever it is that would be the next steps here. But it does feel like I'm being cornered into making some sort of a move, because leaving the worms this way in this stuff is just not going to work, obviously. Otherwise I'm going to be totally out of an entire bin of worms. So yeah, I know, it's all about me. I'm so selfish. But yeah, I guess that's one of the things about worm farming. I suppose this is probably a valuable lesson too, that we can use this as a opportunity to discuss, which is just don't get that caught up in the lives of your short-lived worms that are here for kind of a function of composting, not so much to be your pets, to be cared for. I mean, we're caring for them obviously, but it's out of necessity so that they do our bidding. But these aren't pets, and mistakes will happen, and nature will take its course sometimes, and sometimes you're not going to like what you see. So I'm just going to take a pause here, take a breath, try to figure out what the heck I'm going to do here, but I feel like I got to make a move fast. So let's take a short break now, and then we'll pick up where we left off to try to address this situation here. Well, I got to admit, I took about 2 minutes of a break there, and then I felt like I just got to do something. I couldn't really walk away, and I still feel like I'm not sure what to do. It almost feels like, having access to this worm right here, feels like I should just pull him out, before whatever it is that killed off all these other worms hits him too. Ugh, I really don't get it. One by one? Am I going to really pick out worms one by one? To me, it seemed like they're a little bit lethargic, but they might be moving well enough that I might be able to just separate them, doing like a light separation method, skimming off the material off the top after they've had a chance to dive down into the material that I'm assuming that they don't really like, since so many of them died out on the surface, seeming to just want out of this stuff. Jeez Louise. I guess I don't think I've done a light separation within this bag. I think I've always moved the material into like a rigid container, or done light separations in a rigid container. I'm trying to see if I might be able to do it here. I don't know. I'm going to let the worms dive, give them a minute or two, and then maybe I'm going to see what the possibility of is, just maybe scraping some stuff off the top and seeing how that goes. If not, we might move over to a rigid bin. Well, I gave myself another minute to think there, and I rinsed off my glove in the meantime. I'm starting to have second thoughts on this whole forcing them to keep diving down into the stuff that they obviously don't want to be in. And I'm starting to think that maybe the method that I used on the Euros not long ago might be the way to go. If we put these little guys into a screen, all the material that they're inhabiting should drop out for the most part. And the worms, they're all big enough, I believe, to get caught in the screen for the most part. Maybe we can just do it twice if we have to, if we feel like we lost, you know, if it feels like we've failed to catch a lot of them on the first go around. I know we're going to catch a lot of this dead worm as well, and that'll be my chance to pick some of it out too, I suppose, if possible. So I'm starting to think I need to get my screen, so let me get that going and then we'll get started here. See, my screen is this high-tech bucket inside of a bucket thing with a piece of this hardware cloth in between. So I usually just prop up the whole system on the edge of one of my bins and proceed with scooping stuff in. Here I've got a pretty good sized gap that I don't want to be losing all kinds of material through. Maybe I could put a little piece of cardboard or something in here. But I think this way we can scoop through all this stuff, see what we end up with, and hopefully we'll be able to get these little wormies into something fresh soon. Once I get one of these screens filled up, I've got this little plastic tub that we can empty its contents into. So let's not delay any further. Let's get this going. Well, that makes the last batch. And I've got some little boulders of castings that flew around on the table. I got some worms stuck in the screen here. I got some worms that fell off. They're on the table over there. So I'm going to do some odds and ends type cleanup here to see what I could do about making sure I don't leave any little wormies behind. And I guess the next step is still up in the air in terms of what to do next. Let me think about that further and we'll pick up where I left off momentarily. Well, I've got to be honest, in terms of what we've got here, I think the only difference is the particle size. I think both have lots and lots of worms in them. I kind of forgot that some of these are, maybe even a lot of these, are blue worms, which are tiny sized worms. So I don't think the whole concept of separating the worms from the material that they're in really worked by doing it this way. So I'm kind of going back to the old migration method. I've got some of my prepared bedding right there ready to go. I took one of my old tubs that I've got here. It's missing the handle on this side, as you can see. But it'll be just fine. It even has a whole bunch of holes drilled into the bottom of it. That's why I'm going to use a piece of newspaper to kind of line the bottom so all the small particle size castings don't go passing through the holes. So at this point, it's just me running up to the kitchen to get them some yummy food to rebuild their feeding area with, or to build up a feeding area with. And we'll try to get this migration started, try to help these worms get out of the stuff they're in. We'll begin with the insertion of this piece of paper to line the bottom, just so castings and worms and whatnot don't try to crawl out those little holes on the bottom. So I'm going to use water just to dampen the paper so it sort of adheres to the bottom surface, so there's no little sneaky little passageways for stuff to end up falling out the bottom. And yeah, you know, we're putting dry castings in here, stuff that we've been allowing time to dry, but at this point I'm not worried too much about the dryness of the castings. I think I'm more interested in the well-being of the worms, and if that means ending up with a bunch of castings that have been re-dampened to make things more comfortable for the little worms hanging out in this stuff, then I'll do that. In fact, I might actually do that. But I've got to run up to the kitchen, so I've got the material that I could use to set up their feeding area with in combination with my prepared bedding. So I'll do that now and we'll continue with the setup of the feeding area. So now, besides pre-made seasoned bedding It's been sitting around for a little while. I've also got some fresh bedding we could bring in here. I got some soiled paper towels and soiled napkins and stuff like that. So we'll just plop some of this stuff down on the bottom to help us create a foundation for our horizontal migration feeding zone at this point, I guess. So this will officially bring us out of foraging for the red worm mix, and it's almost kind of like an emergency evacuation at this point, because I don't think we really even intended to initiate this process today, but here we are, kind of reacting to not so good conditions in their bin or their bag. Now what happened there, I don't know exactly. I'd be curious if anyone else has seen something like that. It's so weird how the dead worms all had this weird white kind of moldy stuff growing on them. I've also got my worm chow here. I'm thinking whatever I could do to sweeten up this feeding area, add every possible little bell and whistle that might interest them. So besides that dry worm chow feed, this is pulverized eggshell. That's really more of a grit, less of a food. So in the past you've seen me take great care to try to keep my feeding areas separated from the rest of the finished casting type materials. I don't know, maybe we'll put some sort of a, if I've got a larger piece of paper like this piece here, maybe we can sort of use that to help us have some sort of a nice clean separation line between the materials that we're going to dump in here, keeping them somewhat separate from the feeding area if possible, but we won't leave it there. I think, you know, rather than using that little perforated partition wall that I usually use just as an indicator to show me where, you know, the zones end, the feeding zone over here and the old material over there, I think here it's more important to give the worms just direct access to this stuff so they can get the heck out of the castings that seem to be, I don't know, problematic. You know, if worms are dying in this stuff, I don't know what else to think about it. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but and maybe I'm completely overreacting. I don't know, but I don't know. I guess I'm sort of taking a safe than sorry approach, thinking that the quicker we can get these worms to have a place to move out into and get out of that casting material that they're in now, the better. So hopefully this variety of different types of fruits and veggies and coffee and grit and worm chow and fresh bedding, fresh moisture, you name it, everything's in here. Speaking of moisture, let's just go crazy with the moisture. I want to make sure there's a good amount of it in here. The bedding that I've got right now, this pre-made shredded paper over here, it is pretty damp. The dampness of that stuff does seem to vary from batch to batch, and this batch is a pretty damp one. Just dampening all this paper. I've even got a little bit more here. We got the divider sort of piece that we can maybe use, but I think what we should be doing now is just getting the material that we want to get in here, poured over from the two tubs that they're in now. And we'll remove this. I mean, maybe we can even just perforate it. We got some sort of a simple little informal divider. I mean, so this is the stuff that we screened. So you're going to see worms in here. I'm almost thinking, since this stuff is possibly too dry, maybe I can do a little injection of moisture into layers as I start piling this stuff in. If moisture is what the worms need, then now they're going to get it, and hopefully it helps. If there was something else going on though in this, I don't know what it is. I'll have to fish these little guys out momentarily, but I want to get the rest of what's in the red bucket out as well. Looks like we've got a cherry tomato that evaded our setup of the feeding zone. It almost seems like we're going to have to build up this feeding zone a little bit higher to cover up these yummy pieces of melon and whatnot out here on the top surface. So we'll get back to that in a minute, but now I've got everything that did pass through the screen that's over here in the red bucket. This too, I guess we should probably put in part of it, and I mean, it did seem to me like it was pretty densely populated with worms, but maybe not as much as I thought, which is kind of good. But nevertheless, I'm thinking moisture down into this stuff just in case. And who knows, maybe the material was actually pretty worm-free and was successful in becoming that because of the screening. Let's see what we see as we keep going here. Got a little bit left, but still I don't see any sort of massive, dense concentration of worms. Once again, it could just be little guys that slip through the screen. And just to play it safe, I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of moisture in here. And I think just as far as migrations go, usually one of the main motivators for worms leaving the finished castings out there occupying, I think, is either absence of bedding and or food, or excess dryness, or maybe better said, insufficient moisture. And I think we're probably in that situation here where the worms are highly motivated to go find something better, and hopefully they find themselves over into the feeding area, not just sitting out on the surface dying like we've seen here. So I don't know what else to do here. I think this might be the best we can do. Let's kind of complete this setup of the feeding area, maybe before we put in a final top layer of bedding material, perhaps just a little bit more chow down here, perhaps just a little bit more dampness to complement that. We could spray down the remainder of the bedding we place over the top as well. Make sure the dampness in this area is, you know, obvious, so that the worms come over for it. So I got a feeling that that's really what they're after, these poor little guys. They're probably in material that's just way too dry, and they're just trying to find something a little bit better. I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe there was just something tainted with the material that's causing them to want to flee it. I don't know. For so many of them to die, I guess, is my big concern, because I don't understand why that could have happened. But, well, whatever. Hopefully what we're doing here is going to help. Can't think of much else that we can try. And I think as far as covering up, usually I'm not too into covering these sort of things up, because the idea is to let this stuff continue drying. But I think I'm going to cover. So I'm just going to drape this plastic bag over the entire setup, so that even if the moisture over in the finished castings is insufficient, maybe that heavily damp moisture coming off the feeding area will sort of permeate over onto the other side a little bit, and maybe, you know, transmit across the bin that there's a better place to be. Maybe we even leave this end of it just uncovered so that it's obvious that this is the drying side. So I don't know, folks, that's it for today. I think I'm kind of tired. I got myself into much more than I expected here, so I've been running around like a crazy person trying to take care of stuff here. And oh my goodness, I almost forgot about these little guys too. Let's rinse them out with moisture, because then they'll kind of be compensated for having been left behind in this dry bin. Poor little guys. And, you know, I guess if the collection area is here, it would make sense to place them on this side rather than force them to have to traverse the entire length of the bin to get to where we want them. But that's it for today's video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it better than I did. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I always enjoyed doing this stuff, but, you know, when you're suddenly faced with an unexpected, perhaps not ideal situation, you got to scramble, well, it's not as much fun as it could be. I suppose that's probably the best way to say it. So I'm going to sign off with that. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.